Hello once again. Today we are going to look at the elevator compensation in the butterfly or crow braking and flap menu. You may well have things like flaps set up with flight modes and the trim going with the flight modes, but crow braking or butterfly braking is proportional, so you're not going to smoothly move through an infinite number of flight modes to adjust the trim. And so the butterfly menu has a proportional elevator trim compensation built into it. This is useful not just for glider pilots who'd be using sort of standard proportional crow, but also, for instance, a lot of jet model flyers who would have full flaps set on a switch like to use perhaps a little bit of up aileron, in effect a crow brake, to help kill the lift and settle the model down on its approach and landing. But that little bit of crow might well affect the elevator trim, so let's have a look at how we do it. We'll go into fine tuning, into the butterfly flaps menu, and you can see we've already got crow braking set up. I'll switch my training aid on. There we go. And crow braking, I happen to have it on P4 here. You might have it if you were on a little side slider, for example, if you're trying to set up just a little bit of aileron crow with flaps on the likes of your jet model. We come down to our elevator adjustment, and the S1 refers to elevator servo 1, and you can dial in some amount of either a positive or a negative number, depending which way you need the elevator to travel when you're in crow braking. And if I was to move the crow braking stick, then watching this, the left to right is the movement of the stick, as it were, even though it's an up-down stick, so I'm using the throttle. And then the curve shows where the elevator trim is going. It's not a curve from point to point, because of course you want your elevator to go from its neutral point to one end, rather than suddenly jump to down and go to up. So there's crow braking off. Let's have a look at what happens if we start adjusting things. There's our elevator servo. I've pulled the crow braking, as you can see on the flap and aileron servos. Sorry, that's the elevator servo, and nothing's happening at the elevator. So let's go to full crow brake and start dialing in a number. Yeah, and watch what happens at the elevator servo as I dial up the number, or dial it down. If I go to a negative number, I get elevator trim that way. Positive number, I get elevator trim that way. For the sake of argument, or the sake of the demonstration anyway, let's set it to 100%. And you think, ooh, there's no crow braking, no elevator trim compensation, full crow brake, and I've got 100% elevator travel. You think, ooh, I'm not going to be using anything like that. Well, you could set that number. Please focus, camera. Just getting confused with all the other things around. Yeah. Set your trim compensation to something like 30%, and then no crow, full crow, there would be your trim. But you're thinking, well, other than doing test flying and landing and changing the setting and testing it, and landing and changing the setting and testing it, I don't really know how much I need. Well, the great thing is you can tune it in flight. So for the purpose of tuning it in flight, we shall set the elevator trim compensation to 100%, so that as we move that, the crow brake lever, the elevator servo is going to travel to one end of its limits. Okie doke. Say OK to that. Now we come down to tuning. This is where we can manually control it. What I'm going to do is use the side slider P6 as a control for how much elevator compensation we actually get. So go into that, Move it, P6. It's proportional, good. And centering is off, so it's proportional control. Centering is off. I think that'll be right, because we don't want it to have to be sat at the middle, and then we can only move the control one way or the other, because it will go negative one way, negative the other. So we want it, the amount of our tuning of the compensation to go from 0 to 100. So say OK to that. Come down to here. Come along to the elevator compensation. Now, let's have a look. My side slider is in the up position, which I'm going to treat as being no elevator compensation. If I move the side slider down, I get full elevator trim compensation. Let's have a look at what happens. Side slider is up, and nothing would happen for us. It should just continue to work as it was. Yep, because we now need to set how much it can compensate, which is the value here. And I suspect I'm going to have to set a negative 100%. The reason being, we want to stop the plus 100% that we've dialed up in the amount of compensation. So this is the tuning. So the tuning can turn the compensation, in effect, off. Let's see if that works. Okay. P6 is at its off position. So we should still, with any luck, yes, we have full compensation. If I move the P6 lever all the way down, there we go. No trim compensation. So I've left full crow brake in place, and now by moving P6 I can dial up the amount of elevator trim compensation that I want. Lovely. Let's come back to here. You think to yourself, well, that's nice, but there's still no way I would need 100% elevator travel. Come out of here, elevator adjustment. So we no longer want 100%, we want the maximum it could go to would be, let's say, 30%. So now we've got a maximum of 30% of travel, but that's still tunable okay that tuning, need to come down, elevator minus 100. I should still be able to tune it out. Interesting. We'd need a value to match. Oops. You can see I'm having ideas and making it up on the hoof as I go along. So minus 30. There we go. So the crow maximum trim compensation in crow would be the 30% we set in the adjustment, but I still, because I then set minus 30 in the tuning control, I can still adjust it in flight. So you can fly your model along, do a bit of testing, put it into full crow, see how much it's pitching, and use that side slider to adjust just how much trim compensation you want. Then once you've found what you want, you can lock the values in. For the moment, we'll switch off the variability of the trim compensation. I'm going to show you another little good thing. We'll set this back to 100. Again, just to make the demonstration easier. Oops. Now, what you might find with your crow braking is that in the early stages of moving the stick, the The trim doesn't really change much because the ailerons are coming up a little, the flaps are going down a little, and the model carries on quite happily. But your elevator trim compensation, of course, is coming in as soon as you move the stick as well, and so the model's starting to pitch up or down, whichever way the trim compensation's going. So you don't want the trim compensation to come in until you've moved the stick quite a way, and then the flaps and ailerons are really starting to have some pitch effect. That's easily done. We change the curve type from standard to a multi-point. 3 points, probably not enough, because if we look at the graph, we'd have to get halfway to crow before we could come out of the flat. 5 point, maybe better. Let's go for a 7 point. You could go all the way up to a 9 point. Let's go for a 7 point curve. I scroll down, get that, press the wheel. Now, see the circle appeared over that point. That means if I move the programming wheel, it will move that point around. So let's set it back to 0. I press the programming wheel again, and it moves to the next point. So instead of being 16%, I'm going to move it down to 0. I do that, comes to the next point, and I've found that I actually have to move my stick quite a long way before I need the trim compensation to come in. So let's get the stick thing out of the way. Let's bring that point down to 0 as well, or some little gentle midpoint, you could put it there. Let's smooth the curve out a little bit with that. There we are. So now, when I start applying the crow braking, that amount of stick movement, which is several clicks, will have no effect on the elevator trim. And then it has a gentle effect on the elevator trim and really only starts to kick in by about half stick. Let's have a look at that in reality. So I'm going to start moving. Here's a flap servo. Here's the elevator trim. We can see that at full stick I've got massive amount of elevator trim compensation. So as I start moving the stick, you can see the flap servo up here moving, and the aileron servo, but the trim compensation's not really moving yet, and it only starts to move once I get quite a bit of the crow in. So that's how you can adjust your elevator trim compensation, adjust it in flight, and set a little deadband in it.